At its zenith, it was the greatest empire the world has ever known, a sprawling, unprecedented force of conquest and commerce. It covered 24% of the Earth's land surface and ruled over an astonishing quarter of the planet's population, 458 million lives bending to the will of a single, distant crown. They spoke a truth of staggering dominance when they proclaimed the sun never set on the British Empire, for its shadow stretched from the fog-drenched shores of Britain to the dusty plains of India, from the icy frontiers of Canada to the diamond-rich depths of South Africa. This is the epic, centuries-long saga of ambition, greed, innovation, and ruthless pragmatism. The story of how a small island nation, once peripheral to Europe's great powers, orchestrated the greatest global transformation in history. This profound transformation, built on both technological mastery and human exploitation, created an epic of unrivaled power, the complex, inescapable legacy of which continues to shape the geopolitical landscape of the modern world. The beginning was humble. In the 16th century, England was an underdog, a minor player, dwarfed by the massive wealth and established imperial might of Catholic Spain and Portugal. Its population was sparse, its resources limited, yet within its borders a fierce, defiant spirit was taking root, fueled by the religious upheaval of the Tudor dynasty. With Queen Elizabeth I's ascent in 1558, England turned outward, driven by national confidence, the emerging philosophy of mercantilism, and a desperate religious rivalry with its Catholic neighbors. Unable to challenge the great powers directly, the crown turned to privateering, sanctioning the likes of Sir Francis Drake, a glorified pirate yet a national hero, to plunder Spanish treasure ships and chart new global territories, effectively using state-sponsored piracy to fund its initial naval expansion. The symbolic, decisive moment came in 1588 with the defeat of the Spanish Armada. It was not just a naval victory, it was the moment Britain claimed its destiny on the high seas, signaling that the established order could be challenged and broken. This victory paved the way for permanent settlement, leading to the failed yet foundational attempt at the Roanoke colony, which, though lost, marked North America as the future staging ground for colonial expansion, a place for both religious dissenters and economic opportunists. Be the crown itself, but a sophisticated model of private enterprise. In 1600, the East India Company, IEC, was born, a commercial behemoth granted a royal charter, representing the world's first true joint stock corporation dedicated to conquest. This revolutionary model, where investors pooled resources to share risk for potentially astronomical rewards, was the perfect vehicle for distant expansion. The EIC initially focused on the spice trade, but its ambition soon swelled beyond mere commerce, encountering stiff competition from the Dutch and French. By the early 17th century, they had secured trading rights from the Mughal Emperor Jahangir, establishing key training factories in Surat, Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta. These were not mere warehouses, they were the kernels of future political control, heavily fortified and guarded by the company's own private army, known as sepoys. For the empire to thrive, it needed two things: capital and labor. The capital flowed from the relentless pursuit of Asian spices, tea, and textiles, but the labor, foundational to the plantation economies of the West, was extracted through one of history's most profound atrocities, the Atlantic slave trade. The demand for Caribbean sugar, tobacco, and American cotton fueled a horrific commerce in human lives, establishing the infamous triangle trade. European manufactured goods were exchanged for captured Africans on the West African coast. Then followed the harrowing Middle Passage, a nightmarish voyage of forced transit characterized by brutality, disease, and catastrophic mortality rates to the colonies, particularly the islands of Barbados and Jamaica. British ports like Liverpool and Bristol became globally vital, their newfound wealth directly financed by this systemic violence. The Royal African Company, chartered in 1672, formally sanctioned and consolidated the state's involvement in this brutal system, turning the lives of millions into mere commodities to bolster the empire's financial structure. This human cost was the dark fuel that powered the rise of British capitalism. The EIC's dual role of merchant and military power reached its climax in India at the Battle of Plassey in 1757. Led by the audacious Robert Clive, the company forces defeated the Nawab of Bengal and his French allies. This was not a national conflict in the traditional sense. It was a commercial entity conquering a sovereign territory. The victory granted the EIC effective control over Bengal, one of the wealthiest regions on earth. 8 years later, the Treaty of Allahabad conferred the Diwani, the right to collect revenue or taxation over Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. Overnight, a trading company became the government, taxing millions, redirecting wealth, and laying the essential political groundwork for British rule across the entire subcontinent. This newfound financial control, combined with aggressive taxation, contributed directly to the devastating Bengal famine of the 1770s, where millions perished while the company prioritized its revenue targets. The machine of empire was fully engaged, its efficiency matched only by its brutality. Balance the trade deficit with China over the massive British appetite for tea, the EIC forced Indian farmers to cultivate opium. This drug was then illegally shipped into China, triggering the Opium Wars of the mid-19th century, forcing China to open its ports to British trade, and creating a perverse second triangle trade, a cycle of drug addiction and geopolitical coercion that funded the entire British Raj. This colossal commercial activity generated astronomical wealth, which was immediately reinvested into securing global trade lines. The Royal Navy solidified its position as the world's undisputed maritime authority, its power cemented at Trafalgar in 1805. Naval supremacy guaranteed the smooth, protected flow of goods and troops across the world's oceans. Furthermore, the development of steamships, railroads, and the telegraph network dramatically shrunk the empire, allowing London to project its will and administer its territories with unparalleled speed and efficiency. Following the final defeat of Napoleon in 1815, Britain emerged as the world's sole superpower, ushering in the era known as Pax Britannica, the century of British peace and unrivaled global control. From 1815 to 1914, Britain reigned supreme. The pound sterling became the world's dominant reserve currency, and London dictated the terms of global finance. Strategically, the empire secured key points, such as the acquisition of Hong Kong in 1842, which provided a crucial gateway to East Asia. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 became a lifeline, drastically cutting the sea route to India and making British naval and commercial dominance in the East unassailable. But this control came with intense political costs, particularly following the widespread Indian Rebellion or Sepoy Mutiny of 1857. This massive, brutal uprising against company rule led to its complete dissolution, initiating the British Raj, a period of direct crown rule characterized by a laser-like focus on resource extraction and the maintenance of authority through complex administrative systems, often relying on the strategy of divide and rule by exploiting existing religious and caste tensions. The late 19th century saw the culmination of imperial ambition in the scramble for Africa, fueled by the discovery of vast mineral wealth, gold and diamonds in the south, and intense competition from a newly unified Germany and other European powers. The continent was violently partitioned. The Berlin Conference, 1884 to 1885, formalized this land grab, allowing European powers to draw arbitrary non-ethnic borders that disregarded existing African kingdoms and created political and tribal tensions that persist to this day. Britain's singular driving aspiration was the Cairo to Cape Corridor, a continuous, unbroken swathe of territory running from Egypt in the north to South Africa, connected by a great unifying railway. This was the vision of men like Cecil Rhodes, the ruthless diamond magnate and colonial statesman, who believed British expansion was a moral destiny. This ambition led to military interventions, most famously the occupation of Egypt in 1882 to secure the Suez Canal, and the devastating Second Boer War, 1899 to 1902, where Britain fought Dutch-descended settlers for control of the South African mines, tragically introducing the concentration camp into modern warfare, a chilling precursor to the brutality of the next century. By the turn of the century, Britain controlled roughly a third of Africa's population, administering its vast territories through systems of indirect rule that prioritized British commercial interests over local autonomy or development.
The 20th century, ironically, began the empire's undoing. The two world wars would prove too expensive, both in blood and treasure, for the empire to sustain. World War I stretched British resources to the breaking point. Over 1 million soldiers from India and hundreds of thousands from African colonies fought and died for the crown, often under the false promise that their service would earn greater political rights and autonomy. The war irrevocably drained Britain's financial supremacy, shifting the center of global economic power decisively to the United States. The Second World War delivered the final, fatal blow. Over 2.5 million Indian troops participated. The paradox was inescapable. Colonial soldiers were fighting fascism and defending democracy abroad, only to be denied basic freedoms and self-government at home. The Atlantic Charter, 1941, signed by Churchill and Roosevelt, committed to the right of all peoples to choose their own form of government, a principle that stood in direct moral contradiction to the very existence of the empire, and which the colonized world seized as their charter for freedom, creating an unprecedented crisis of conscience for the British government. The financial and moral debt of the wars proved too great. The newly elected Labour government in 1945, facing massive debt obligations and mounting civil disobedience, recognized that holding the empire was no longer tenable. The first and most spectacular domino to fall was India. In August 1947, India gained independence, but the joyous moment was tragically overshadowed by the catastrophe of partition. The arbitrary division of the subcontinent into a secular India and a Muslim Pakistan along religious lines sparked widespread sectarian violence and led to one of the largest and most bloody mass migrations in human history. The immediate cost of decolonization was devastating. The moment of ultimate truth for Britain's global standing came in 1956, the Suez Crisis. When Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, Britain, France, and Israel launched a desperate, misguided military invasion. The intervention was immediately and forcefully condemned by the new global superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Under intense political and economic pressure from Washington, Britain was humiliated and forced to withdraw. Suez confirmed the inevitable. Britain could no longer act independently. The empire was finished. The subsequent wave of decolonization was swift and unstoppable. Throughout the 1960s, African colonies gained their independence in what became known as the Year of Africa. The empire, which once dictated global policy, virtually vanished within a single generation. Yet its legacy is indelible and enduring. English remains the lingua franca, the language of global commerce, science, and international institutions, its dominance a direct consequence of imperial reach. British systems of law, parliamentary democracy, and educational models introduced throughout the colonial period continue to shape governance and societal structures in many post-colonial states, providing both a stable framework and, at times, instruments of division. The global love for sports like cricket remains a powerful cultural anchor in nations like India and the Caribbean. Today, the empire's organizational legacy survives as the Commonwealth of Nations, a voluntary association of 56 independent sovereign states. It is no longer an imperial tool, but a forum for cooperation, striving to uphold shared, though often debated, values like democracy and human rights. The story of the British Empire remains a profound, complex duality, a history of astonishing innovation and brutal exploitation, of global connection and deep-seated division, of immense concentrated prosperity for one nation and systemic, intentional poverty for many others. Modern debates surrounding the legacy of the empire, from calls for the return of looted cultural artifacts, such as the Benin bronzes, to discussions of financial reparations for historical economic injustices, continue to challenge the narrative of imperial nostalgia, forcing a reckoning with the past. To truly comprehend the conflicts, the borders, and the economic relationships of the 21st century, the power dynamics of the United States, the rise of India, the economic structures of Africa, one must first understand the history of this small island that dared to rule the world. The sun may have set on the empire, but its long shadow remains, and the global community continues to grapple with the complex, painful history of the Crown and its colonies.